How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. I've been getting into mining and prospecting videos on YouTube recently, and I was inspired to make a mobile mining operation sitting above an underground gem-filled cave. This takes place in the wild imaginary West, so it will probably end up looking a little outlandish, but that's the point. In case you're not familiar, the Wild Imaginary West is an original universe that I've been creating here on YouTube for the past few years. It's based loosely on the historical American Wild West, but this one has monsters and mechs, obviously. At the end of the video, I have a montage of all of my builds from the universe so far. After stacking up all of my foam layers, I began carving a cave into the side of this foam brick using my handheld hot wire. The hot wire could only reach so far, so I had to switch to a utility knife, and it takes years to get this fast, so please don't try that at home. After the knife, I switched to a rotary tool. This method creates a hefty amount of dust, so I had the vacuum ready, and I also wore a respirator the whole time. I then used a heat gun to create the soft water-eroded cave look, and after sanding the sides, I realized I didn't want the top of this to be flat, so I added one additional layer to the right side of the hill, and then I cut it at an angle. After that, to preserve the nice texture of the rocks that I had created, but also give them some firmness, I coated everything in matte Mod Podge and paint. The Mod Podge creates the shell that protects the foam, and the paint helps me know that I've applied it everywhere. Once thoroughly coated, I mixed up some Sculptamold and I put it all together in one clump, like a Soggy Rat, on top of the Diorama. And then after spreading it out to fully cover the top, I smoothed it with isopropyl alcohol, and then I set it aside to dry. But then I brought it back immediately because I needed to drill a hole. And after the hole had been drilled, I coated the interior of the hole with more Mod Podge, and then I set it aside to dry. Now with the base of my landscape done, containing a nice big hole, it was time to kitbash the machinery that could make said hole. I started with these pieces of a lunar lander kit that looked perfect for the base of this big rig, and then I broke out all my other bits boxes. I recently organized all of my bits into trays, but I'm not going to be calling them bits trays, they will still be called bits boxes. The first thing that I made from scratch was a spiral drill bit, and after doing a bunch of searching on the internet to find out what these drill bits are actually called, I discovered that I could only find them on fake things. The closest thing I could find was for splitting wood, but nowhere could I find them in use for tunneling or mining or splitting rocks or anything like that. Let me know if I was looking in the wrong place or I had the wrong verbiage, but I feel like we've potentially been lied to about these spiral drill bits. And now that I'm thinking about it, I may unfortunately be perpetuating that same lie with this video. Sorry about that. Once the drill arm had been added to a base, I ran a guitar string cable from the base to the drill itself, and the drill arm was done. I had some treads from another kit that I filled out with some wheels and axles, and then I threw some things between the treads to help hold up the rest of the vehicle a little later on. The frame of that lunar lander kit that I mentioned earlier was great, but it needed a wooden deck to help sell the Wild Western theme. After gluing down some balsa sheets, I trimmed them to size, and then after adding the lower section of the frame, I added some panel lines, and I brought out the wood grain using a wire brush. I then glued the drill arm in place on the deck and began making my head frame. That's the thing that sits above a mine shaft that's basically an elevator. Along with the frame that holds the wheel, I made an elevated platform to hold the box that the hoist is inside of. The reason I had to elevate it was so that there was room to walk underneath. After that, I installed the wheel. Mining requires a lot of water, so I put together this little water tower, but before I could install it, I needed to have the walls of the mill in place. After cutting out and assembling a couple more walls, I glued the second structure in its place on the deck. The idea here is to imply that this room is full of machinery for processing raw material, although we won't be able to see inside when it's done. On the back, I added a chute for all of the crushed up dirt and finer stuff to come out, and then a sluice to catch all the precious metals and precious moments. With the second structure done, it was time to add the water tower, which I reinforced with plenty of extra beams, and then I connected it to its plumbing. After that, I threw on a few more little details like some railings and some greeblies to make a forestall. Then I made the cage that the miners will use to get down into the mine once a hole has been drilled. I drilled some holes in this piece here, and then I installed some styrene bars and the floor. I'm going to leave part of this top section unpainted as it will hold the light source for the miners when they're down in the cave. I added the last few details, which were mostly little guitar string pieces, and the mining rig was done. As you can see, when it's time to move this thing, it rotates so that the window is facing forward. That way the driver can see what's going on. There's always a good deal of cleanup involved in kit bashing, and the key is to not throw away things that you'll use later, but not save things that should be thrown away. At this point, the rig, the cave, and the cage were all done, but I needed a crew. Luckily, I have quite a few 1/72 scale figures from the Wild Western era to choose from, including some miners. I picked out 5 guys who were in appropriate action poses, and then I glued them to a painting base before priming everything black, starting with the rig. After the machinery and the figures and the cave had all been painted black, I gave everything a coat of white sprayed directly from above. To this point in my Wild Imaginary Western videos, most mining operations have been a complete disaster, given all the normal hazards of mining combined with the number of large spiders and bugs that live in the caves and mines of this universe. Not wanting to risk all the dangers of a traditional mine, this group came up with a way to move their rig to new places and keep themselves a little more out of harm's way. Rather than digging long tunnels and working one mine for years, this crew travels around placer mining and searching for cavities near the surface that may contain large deposits of more exposed precious metals and gems. The rig is equipped with a drill for puncturing an opening in said cavities or breaking up larger rocks, as well as a head frame and a cage which can lower the miners into the cave from above, keeping them relatively safe, like a shark cage, until they know that there are no bugs to worry about. The cage itself also lights up and gives visibility to the miners, and once they've gathered the material, they put it in the cage to be hoisted up and processed in the onboard mill. It doesn't have the capacity of a stationary mill, but for the amount of material that they typically work with, it does just fine. They also aren't just looking for precious metals, but gemstones and fossils as well. I put the above ground crew member in place, and then I gave the rig some final touches like gloss varnish water in the sluice and some mud on the drill. After that, it was time to paint the cave. Before painting the landscape, I added a ring of dirt around the hole that would have been pushed up by the drill. Once that was built up and glued in place, I used oil washes to give the cave a nice cool, spooky, damp cave look. After the oil in the cave was dry, I moved above ground and I applied washes which I wiped off immediately and replaced with pigment powders, which I blended all together using isopropyl alcohol. I'll be adding some greenery to the surface in a minute. The next step was to glue the rig in place and get the cage mounted to the hoist. I got the rope glued into position at the top and then I threaded it down into the cave where I connected it to the cage, which I had wired to an LED and a 3-volt battery. I then tested my circuit and I'm really happy with the way it looks. Every time I have extra resin and I don't use it to make normal rocks, I use it to make fancy rocks, which I will be using to line the inside of this cavity. In universe, these gems don't have any special power capabilities, but they do have other practical uses. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. After the gems were installed, it was time to install the crew. The second to last thing to do was to add some brown greenery. The reason for doing this was to create some tracks behind the rig. And the last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 4.0. After that, I called it good. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, here is the collection of the Wild Imaginary West so far, although it does not include the town, and I think I missed a couple others. that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.